I'm very happy to have Sasha and Wolf with me, both with a new venture which is called Radial. I have met them 2-3 weeks ago, first time, and I was very excited because I thought that they should really add here into our discussions which we are doing about ESG. And why is it like that? We will come through our conversation to it. Sasha, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Sure. First of all, we are honored to be here because we are, as Stefan said, a very young company. We are on the market now for, I think, 10 or 11 weeks now. As other founders would probably say, it already feels longer because there's a lot of work to do, but we are very happy to be here and honored to be invited. So thank you for that, first of all. Wolf and I have both been in Big Four companies for approximately 10 years, namely Deloitte and Ernst & Young. Slightly different backgrounds, both started in auditing, very classical start within finance. And then the ways spread a little bit from a focus perspective. I went into restructuring value creation services at Deloitte, and Wolf went into M&A transaction services. And that's what we also offer at our new venture Radial, where we support private equity companies along the whole deal cycle, because Wolf is the M&A expert and I know a little bit about value creation services, and that's what we try to combine with our new venture on the market.
Wolf, do you want to add something on this?
Well, when we found Radial, we had the intention of, starting a fully sustainable business. And I think that's what also drove us, where we not just wanted to bring a different perspective and different kind of services and another advisor, but really wanted to be, and lead the change to some extent. And that is what we had in mind when we found Radial.
Okay, so this was actually also why you are here. A sustainable business. You said in our first conversation that you are searching for specific KPIs which are at least reflecting your type of business. Maybe you can give our audience your view, what you have experienced through the last weeks when you have established it.
I think we had a pretty high ambition in doing what we wanted to do. I think the service area and the professional services that we are doing are M&A and value creation services, but setting up an ESG compliant company for ourselves, and not only compliant in a case of avoiding sanctions, sort of. I mean, there are no sanctions yet for companies such as in our size, but there might be in the future, but we really wanted to make it part of our DNA. Yeah, and really not want to greenwash on the market or tell anything that's maybe not 100% true at the end, but really do it at the end. And I think big ideas and big strategies are always nice if you read them on paper. And I think especially in the ESG field, there are many experts out there right now, but it's still a very difficult to grasp topic for most of the companies out there. Yeah, there are some rules, there are some guidelines. Some really implemented into the DNA as well. Some are greenwashing, so it's a big topic. We wanted to do it right, but we also wanted to make it graspable in a certain way, and also to operationalize it 100%. And part of this operationalization process are, of course, very specific KPIs, and then the data behind it to measure these KPIs.
What type of KPIs are these?
So it was funny because the day we talked was actually the day we had like an internal, a workshop for almost the entire day when we discussed, okay, how do we, really just coming from that strategy and that vision that we had in mind, like how do we operationalize it? And how do we really go into the details? And I think what is important, especially for smaller companies, when you don't have the regulations that big companies have, you can use it as guidelines. But then also the difficulty is you are not that well staffed, you are just like, you don't have that manpower and the task force to obviously track and have their own, 5-10 people to just track and get the data and everything. So we knew, and I mean, it was also something that we had implemented from the very beginning. We wanted to follow a data-driven approach and just make sure we collect the data. And I think that's also what we heard in some other sessions, where it is really focused on data, generating good data, and also and then it comes to how to generate the data, and we try to fully implement the data generation into our accounting system, because we were always looking at, okay, how is, not just the KPI that we defined, which I know was your question, so just 1 second, but how to really get there and make sure that we can, in the future, track it, almost automated to the best extent possible. And I don't know, you want to maybe hop into the KPIs?
We can do that a little bit, yeah. The pillars are, of course, E, S, and G. I think that's pretty clear of the strategy. And then in each of these categories, there are a few KPIs that we defined. I think a major difference compared to other companies is, of course, that we are very small right now and we are a consulting firm. So all the typical KPIs for maybe production companies with very complex supply chains, which is, by the way, one of the biggest issues from our perspective within the ESG sector, to really make the supply chain transparent. But I think that's an own lecture that we could do here. We really defined first of all the KPIs that are important for us. Yeah, and in E, of course, the key is to track our CO2 emissions. Yeah, which sounds very simple at the beginning, but when you actually get into the point where you say, which data are we collecting? Where's the data coming from? How do we collect the data? It gets a little bit tricky from our perspective. In consulting is always concerned with traveling, I think. We at Radial, we are very much focused on reducing business travel as much as we can as part of our ESG strategy, also actively promoting that to the client, because COVID in the last few years showed that consulting can also be possible in a rather remote setup, besides maybe kickoff meetings and important conversations. But starting to track our, for example, CO2 emissions for traveling. Yeah, where's this data coming from? Do you do a manual list in an Excel spreadsheet and just everybody can type in, for example, the kilometers that we're driving in a rental car instead of the train or something like that? So we started to also make it a little bit pragmatic in order to track that and say, okay, how much emissions, for example, is the production of a computer causing, just on average? Yeah, how much emission is 1 kilowatt hour of electricity causing? Yeah. Things like that, and really using studies, using renowned sources in order to pragmatically add up how much CO2 we are actually emitting. And right now being on the verge of using our accounting system, also as Wolf mentioned, to track the kilometers, for example, driven with a rental car instead of the ecological Deutsche Bahn, where we ask employees to add in their kilometers, for example, in the system. And you see it sounds very simple, yeah. Just calculate your CO2 emissions, but it's not that simple actually practically implementing it. But I think we are getting better and better and generating more and more data right now in order to get close to this point. Yeah. That's only for me, of course. Yeah. Maybe.
And then, for example, and with like the laptops that we are buying, which is really like the most biggest part of equipment that we are having, you can track it through the fixed asset register. So you have that information there. And you just need to make sure it runs into the right report at the end. Then you can track, you can't track how many hours somebody is working, but you can, estimate it to be like 8, 9, 10 hours, maybe a day, and then multiply it with like the average electricity mix in Germany and how much emissions that are, So you can't fully come to that exact number, but you can work with fair and reasonable estimates. And I think if you make that transparent, because part of that really problem about ESG is the complexity. It's such a widespread topic, especially for smaller companies and companies that don't have a huge finance department, that you need to make sure, coming from like, this is ESG to really, what is ESG for me? make it transparent, make it clear, document why you think these are your KPIs, narrow it down to like 5 to 10 important KPIs, and then make sure you track those. And that is how we approached it, to make sure we can, in some way condense it and work with it.
It sounds very time consuming, actually, what you have done. Yeah? And I'm a little bit, and that's why I'm thinking through, you have a client at the end, and the client wants to be served somehow. Yeah? And what is in for the client at the end? When you are doing all these exercises with your team and yourself? Is it for the client?
Yeah, maybe just one step back quickly, because we just talked about E now. There are also S&G considerations that we are considering at Radial. For example, within S, employee retention will be one KPI, a rather simple KPI. But we are also tracking, for example, employee satisfaction. Yeah, right now we don't have that many employees. It's one right now, besides the two of us. But we are growing. There are a few more people coming in the next month, so it will get more and more relevant. But really track the employee satisfaction, and then really set up a retention rate, and also compare it to the usual fluctuation within the consulting area, which is often rather on the higher side. And within governance, for example, what we are doing is clearly measuring our customer satisfaction as part of every project. It's also not always done, I think, in many areas. And I think we also ask slightly different questions. Yeah, lots about personal experiences and stuff like that, not these standard surveys where you just say, were you satisfied from 1 to 5? That's maybe slightly the difference. And last but not least, we also have a full salary transparency in our company. So each employee's salary is transparently illustrated in our intranet, and also our salaries or dividends are basically transparently illustrated in the intranet. Yeah,
intranet.
Yeah, internet. But that are a few other things that we just wanted to mention to make it a little bit more graspable what we are actually doing there. Yeah.
But coming back to the question once more, what is in for the customer at the end? Because the client is somebody, or is it more to get more traction or attractiveness for new employees?
So no, it's both, I guess. The younger people especially are very focused, very concerned about it, and I think they are right about it. So they keep asking those questions. But we had also the first customers reach out. A client recently where really contacted us because she said, well, I Googled you actually, and I found that you are doing consulting in M&A, and you are also on that ESG track, because that is important to me. And he was not, he was a little bit in the more senior range. So you see also that is happening. It's not, I don't think it's that huge. Not everybody has fully shifted to it, but it's becoming, and I think that's what we are hearing all the time here. It's becoming more and more important. And the question is, once you start offering those services, customers also ask you, and what are you doing, And you need to be transparent, and you need to be not just prepared for that, but you need to have an answer for that, because otherwise you can't. I don't think you can, bring that and deliver that to a client.
Interesting. So for me, we have written it there, ESG in a consulting company, the perspective for startup that wants to make a difference. So this seems to be a different USP or ASP at the end. Yeah?